I still remember the exact moment my world shattered. My brother Derek leaned over my little daughter Lila, her fragile body trembling from another round of chemotherapy, and said words that no parent should ever hear. He told her, "Heaven is better than earth with your broken mother." I froze. I couldn't believe my ears. Lila looked up at me with those big, trusting eyes, and for the first time I felt the crushing weight of helplessness. Lila was only 8, bright, curious, and impossibly kind. She had these little habits that made her the center of my life. She would curl her fingers around the edges of her coloring books, humming softly as she filled in the shapes, or collect stray leaves from our backyard and pretend they were treasures from another world. Her laughter could fill a room, even on days when her body ached so badly she could barely walk. She was my heart outside my body, the reason I woke up every morning determined to fight for her, even when the hospital calls made me feel like the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. And then there was Derek. My older brother, 35, always had a way of wrapping himself in a cloak of charm while hiding something colder underneath. He was the type of person who could make you feel like he was helping you while slowly planting seeds of doubt and fear. When he walked into the hospital room that day, I thought maybe he'd softened. Maybe he'd come to support Lila and me. But the look in his eyes told a different story, a quiet calculation that made my skin crawl. I wanted to scream at him, to shake him, and demand he stop manipulating my little girl. But something froze me in place. I wanted to protect Lila, yes, but I also had this terrible awareness that other family members, my mother, Margaret, and even my ex-husband Tom, might see my reaction as overreacting. My mother had always been critical of me, never one to hold back a sharp word. She would say things like, "You've always been too soft on your kids. Look at this mess. Leela wouldn't be in so much trouble if you'd been stricter." Even now, I could hear her voice echoing in my mind. Tom, my ex, had his own way of staying distant. He loved Lila, but his love came in gestures, occasional weekend visits, gifts, polite phone calls, not the kind of raw, constant support a sick child needs. So I had always been the one standing between Lila and the chaos of the world. And suddenly, Derek had put himself in that space, and worse, he was trying to manipulate my daughter's very soul. The room felt suffocating, filled with the hum of hospital machines and the faint smell of antiseptic. Lila clutched her favorite stuffed rabbit, a little worn from years of love, and I realized in that moment how much I had taken her small joys for granted. This was supposed to be a safe space for her, a place where she could fight her illness without being told that life on Earth wasn't worth it. And yet Derek had turned her, hope into a weapon, dangling this cruel idea of heaven over her like a promise of escape. I wanted to run out of that room, to pull Lila into my arms and shield her from the world, but I stayed, frozen, watching my brother's words sink into her mind. "Mom, maybe he's right," she whispered, and the sound of it pierced me like ice. I could feel my heart cracking in ways I hadn't imagined possible. I wanted to argue, to reason, to cry out to the universe for some kind of justice, but all I could do was hold her hand and silently beg her to remember who she was, who I knew she was, strong, brave, and full of life. It was in that moment, standing in that sterile hospital room, that I realized how much danger my daughter was in, not just from her illness, but from someone who should have loved her unconditionally. I would have to fight harder than ever. And little did I know, this fight would take me to the darkest corners of my family, challenge every ounce of my courage, and eventually reveal truths so shocking that even the judge in court would weep. That day, my world changed forever. I didn't yet know that Derek's manipulation would lead to my daughter refusing treatment, that my family would blame me for her death, or that I would have to grieve in silence while secretly gathering the evidence that would ultimately expose the monster hiding behind my brother's familiar face. All I knew was that the person I trusted most in my family had just tried to steal my daughter's hope, and I would never forgive him for it. Before that day with Derek, life was already a constant balancing act. I was a single mother, raising Lila on my own after my divorce from Tom, who did his best to remain in her life but was always too busy or too distant to truly understand what we were going through. Most nights I would sit by Lila's bedside after her treatments, brushing her hair back from her pale face, whispering words of encouragement, and pretending I wasn't terrified inside. I told myself I had to stay strong. For her, for us. But the truth was I was exhausted in ways I couldn't explain. Every phone call from the hospital, every new symptom, every test result felt like a punch to my chest. Lila was the kind of child who could make even the hardest days bearable. She had this tiny ritual of placing her stuffed animals in a circle around her bed before she slept, as if they were a counsel protecting her from the illness that ravaged her body. She loved to draw little worlds where she and her imaginary friends went on adventures, and she had an infectious sense of curiosity about life that made me forget, if only for a moment, that she was so sick. She would ask questions about everything: why the sky was blue, why the birds sang, and more recently, what happened after people die. Those questions now hung over me like storm clouds. I didn't know how to answer, and deep down, I feared that Derek would give her an answer she wasn't ready for, or worse, one that would hurt her. My parents, Margaret and John, were always in the background, silently observing, but they had their own opinions about my parenting. Margaret had a sharp tongue and rarely missed a chance to remind me of my mistakes, both past and present. She often said, "Lila wouldn't be in this much trouble if you were stricter." John, my father, was gentler, but he avoided confrontation at all costs. He nodded along politely during our conversations, but never really intervened. Their presence created an invisible pressure, as if my every decision was being judged, measured against some unattainable standard. Even Tom, though not cruel, had a way of making me feel like I was alone in this. He cared, but he didn't live the daily reality of watching a little girl wither under a disease that had no mercy. I bore the responsibility of every medicine administered, every hospital visit scheduled, every tear comforted in the middle of the night. And somehow, in the midst of all that, I had to maintain a semblance of normalcy for Lila, to be her mom, her protector, and the anchor in her small, fragile world. The hospital had become both a sanctuary and a battleground. Machines beeped around us, nurses moved efficiently but without the warmth I tried to provide, and doctors gave updates in clinical tones that left no room for hope. Lila's treatments were grueling, draining her small body day by day, and yet she endured with a quiet bravery that made me ashamed of my own fear. I watched her push through pain with a smile, insisting on coloring in her books and telling me stories about imaginary friends who saved worlds. She was resilient, far more resilient than I ever imagined a child could be. It was during one of these long afternoons in the hospital room, as Lila lay curled up with her stuffed rabbit and her tiny blanket, that Derek first arrived. At first, he appeared concerned, asking questions about her health, nodding sympathetically. But there was something in the way he looked at me, something calculating, sharp, almost predatory, that set my nerves on edge. I couldn't place it at first, but deep down I felt an unease that I couldn't shake. Lila didn't notice it yet. She was used to Derek's visits being infrequent, and at 8, she trusted the adults around her instinctively. She reached for her coloring pencils with a smile and said, "Uncle Derek, look, I made a rainbow." He leaned over, smiled, and spoke softly, and that was when the first seed of manipulation began to take root. His words were carefully chosen, almost imperceptibly leading her thoughts away from me and toward an idea I wasn't ready to hear, that maybe this world wasn't safe for her, that maybe she would be better somewhere else. At that moment, standing in the sterile hospital room, I realized just how isolated I was. Not physically, but emotionally. I had Lila, but everyone else in my life, the family who should have supported me, either didn't understand or had already started placing blame on me. And I knew, deep in my heart, that the battle to protect her soul was just beginning. The days after Derek's visit were unbearable. I could feel a subtle shift in Lila, something almost imperceptible but terrifyingly clear to me as her mother. Her laughter was quieter, her coloring less vibrant, and the sparkle in her eyes, the very essence of her curiosity, seemed dimmed. One night, I found her sitting on the edge of her bed, holding her rabbit, staring at the ceiling. "Mom, do you think maybe Uncle Derek is right?" she whispered, her small voice trembling. I froze, my heart pounding so violently I could feel it in my throat. I knelt beside her, taking her tiny hands in mine. "Lila, what do you mean? Uncle Derek didn't say anything that matters more than what's true. Do you understand?" She nodded slowly, but the doubt in her eyes cut deeper than any words could. I knew Derek had already planted a seed. He was clever, manipulative in a way that made him almost believable, especially to a child who was scared and weak. I wanted to confront him immediately, to tell him to leave us alone, but the hospital policies, the fear of family judgment, and my own uncertainty kept me silent. Meanwhile, the rest of my family began showing their cracks. Margaret, my mother, had started making passive-aggressive remarks that I couldn't ignore anymore. "Maybe if you'd done more when she was first diagnosed, this wouldn't be happening," she said one evening, glancing at me with that cold, judging stare she had perfected over decades. Even John, my father, usually silent, murmured, "You just have to trust the doctors, but sometimes things slip through." Slip through? I was trying every day to hold my daughter's fragile life together, and now I was under scrutiny for what? Tom, ever well-meaning but distant, said, "Maybe she should consider what Derek is suggesting. Heaven is peaceful, right?" His words were like knives disguised as concern. Every adult around me seemed to validate Derek's poison, intentionally or not. I realized then that this wasn't just about one visit from my brother. It was an entire web of people subtly undermining my authority, my instincts, and my bond with Lila. Derek returned more frequently, each visit longer, more invasive. He brought small gifts, books about heaven, paintings of angels, and whispered just enough to tug at her heart without leaving obvious evidence. He would kneel by her bed, his voice soft but insistent. "Lila, it's okay to think about going to a place where there's no pain. You deserve peace." And Lila, tired of needles and hospital beds, began to listen. I started noticing the changes during treatments. She would refuse certain medications, sometimes even her appetite. Her tiny body was already fragile, but now she was actively resisting the very care that might have prolonged her life. Every protest, every hesitation was like a physical blow to me. I tried to reason, to comfort, to explain, but the fear in her eyes, the fear Derek had cultivated, was stronger than my words. I decided to record our conversations, a desperate attempt to capture the truth before it was too late. One afternoon, I whispered into my phone while Derek tried to convince Lila to skip a dose. His words were carefully measured, almost soothing but twisted. "Mom doesn't understand, Lila. Maybe she can't handle what you need. Don't you want to be free from all this pain?" Lila's eyes widened, confusion etched across her face, and I felt rage and heartbreak mixing in a storm I couldn't contain. The tension reached a point where every family interaction became a minefield. Margaret would hint at my failure as a parent during holiday visits. Tom would ask probing questions about whether I was forcing Lila to endure her suffering. Even John would sigh and glance at me with that helpless, disappointed look. I felt utterly isolated. And yet, I knew the one battle I couldn't lose was protecting Lila's mind and spirit. Every night I prayed, pacing her bedroom while she slept. "Please keep her safe," I whispered into the darkness. "Give me the strength to fight this, protect her from him." I felt both powerless and hyper-aware, watching Derek's influence slowly take hold while simultaneously plotting how I could stop it. I couldn't let my daughter make a decision she didn't fully understand. But how do you battle someone who hides cruelty beneath concern, especially when no one else believes you? And so the conflict became a quiet, brutal war. On one side, my daughter, manipulated and vulnerable. On the other, my brother, calm and calculating, embedding doubt in her young mind. And in the middle, me, fighting invisibly, gathering evidence while silently grieving the loss of the child I knew she could still be. Every glance, every whisper, every hesitation became another heartbeat in a tension-filled countdown toward a moment I feared but knew was inevitable. The stakes were higher than anything I had ever faced, not just life and death, but innocence, trust, and the fragile bond between a mother and her daughter. Derek's manipulation was subtle, insidious, and it was working. I could feel it, and I knew that soon, this conflict would demand a decision that would change all of us forever. I reached a breaking point one late night, sitting on Lila's bedroom floor, her small body curled beneath a mountain of blankets. The silence of the room pressed down on me, broken only by the faint hum of the hospital-grade oxygen machine we'd installed at home to help her breathe easier. I had spent hours watching her drift between sleep and restless fits of pain, her tiny hands clutching her rabbit like a lifeline, and I knew with a gut-deep certainty, that if I didn't act soon, Derek's manipulation could cost her everything. For days, I had been gathering small pieces of evidence, carefully recording conversations without letting anyone suspect. I felt the weight of it pressing down on me like a mountain. My hand trembled as I pressed record on my phone that evening, knowing I had to capture the truth before it was too late. Derek was persuasive, cunning, almost theatrical in the way he twisted words, making his cruelty sound like concern. He leaned close to Lila, smiling as he spoke, his voice smooth and gentle. "Mom can't understand what you're feeling, Lila. Don't you want a place where there's no pain, no hospital, no needles?" Lila's eyes filled with uncertainty and my stomach churned. I whispered under my breath, "I see you, Lila. I know what he's doing." It was terrifying to sit there, powerless, while my daughter's innocence was being hijacked. But I also knew that this recording might be the only chance I had to protect her if things spiraled further. The decision wasn't just about exposing Derek, it was about reclaiming my daughter's mind and heart. I realized that waiting, hoping someone else would intervene, wasn't an option. My mother and father would likely dismiss my concerns, Tom would hedge, and Derek's charisma could easily convince anyone who wasn't paying close attention. The responsibility fell entirely on me. I had to act. I spent that night planning every step carefully. I created a schedule to record each visit, keeping my phone hidden under Lila's blanket or my lap. I noted down exact phrases he used, his tone, and her reactions. I also began documenting the subtle ways he had eroded her trust in me, noting every hesitant refusal to take medication or participate in treatment. Each note, each recording felt like a piece of armor I was building for the battle I knew was coming. But this wasn't just about evidence. I had to prepare Lila herself. One evening, while Derek was out, I knelt beside her bed and took her small hands in mine. "Lila," I said softly, "I know some people are saying things that aren't true, but you have to remember something very important. You are safe with me, and I will always fight for you. You don't have to listen to anyone else about what's right for your body or your heart." She looked at me, her eyes wide with trust and confusion. "But what if he's right, Mom?" she asked quietly. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it cut straight through me. I held her tighter, my chest aching. "No, baby. Nothing he says can take away the truth. You are brave. You are loved, and you deserve to fight for your life. Always." It was a fragile victory, small but vital. I knew Derek's influence hadn't disappeared, but planting the seed of truth in Lila's mind was crucial. She had to know that I was her shield, her anchor, and her voice when she felt scared or manipulated. That night, I realized that my role had shifted. I wasn't just her mother anymore. I was a guardian against deceit, a warrior in a war that no one else could see. The next morning, I approached the hospital social worker and gently explained my fears, carefully omitting my recordings, but emphasizing my concern about external influence. I requested additional oversight for Lila's care, advocating fiercely for her safety. Each conversation felt like walking a tightrope. Too much suspicion, and they might think I was paranoid. Too little, and Derek could continue unchecked. By the end of the week, I had built a covert network, recordings hidden, documentation ready, and a plan to confront Derek legally if needed. My mind was exhausted, but I felt a grim determination settle over me. I would not allow my daughter to make an irreversible decision based on lies and manipulation. I refused to watch her hope erode any further. As I tucked Lila in that night, brushing her hair back from her face, I whispered, "We're going to be okay. I promise I'll protect you from anyone who tries to hurt you." Her small hand closed over mine, and for the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope. The storm wasn't over. Derek's shadow still loomed, and the family drama around us only added pressure. But I had chosen my path. I had made the decision to fight, And that decision, that deliberate, courageous choice, set the stage for the moment when truth would finally confront lies and justice would demand its due. The courtroom was colder than I expected, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and makes every heartbeat echo louder than it should. I held Lila's favorite rabbit in my lap, even though she wasn't there to squeeze it anymore, as if carrying it would somehow carry a piece of her spirit with me. I had spent weeks preparing for this moment, every detail of Derek's manipulation documented, every recording rehearsed in my mind. But nothing could have prepared me for the raw, gut-wrenching reality of facing him in front of the judge. Derek walked in with that same calculated calm, the smirk I had hated for years etched across his face. He glanced at me briefly as if daring me to challenge him, but I wasn't here to argue with his charm or his facade anymore. I was here to expose the truth. The prosecutor called my name and I stepped forward, trying to steady my trembling hands. I felt every eye in the courtroom on me, but I focused on the task at hand, protecting Lila, even in death, and ensuring Derek would be held accountable for the cruelty he had inflicted. I pressed play on the first recording. Derek's voice filled the room, soft and almost tender as he spoke directly to Lila. "Mom can't understand, Lila. Heaven is better than earth with your broken mother. You deserve peace." I watched the judge's expression change almost immediately, her eyes widening as the words sank in. She leaned forward in her seat, her hand gripping the edge of the bench, and I could see her trying to steady herself. Derek didn't flinch, didn't deny it. He sat there like a predator caught mid-hunt, and for the first time I felt a flicker of satisfaction, not joy, not relief, but the satisfaction of finally unveiling the truth. The room was silent, the kind of silence that stretches and pulls at your chest. Then I began to speak, my voice steady but tight with emotion. "Your Honor, this is my daughter's voice. These are the words that led her to refuse treatment, the words that manipulated her in her most vulnerable moments. She trusted him, and he betrayed her. She is gone because he convinced her that leaving this world was better than staying with me." I could feel the room shifting. Margaret, my mother, sat with her hands clasped tightly, no longer judging me, no longer questioning my parenting. Tom shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Derek's smirk faltered slightly, though he tried to maintain control. And the judge, her face crumpled in disbelief and sorrow. She called for the next recording. Derek's voice again, gentle, persuasive, calculated. "It's okay, Lila. Mom can't handle what you need. Don't you want to be free from all this pain?" Tears streamed down her cheeks, and she whispered under her breath, "Monster." I felt a lump in my throat, hearing the truth spoken aloud, knowing that someone in authority finally saw what I had been trying to convey for months. The courtroom wasn't just witnessing evidence, it was witnessing the emotional devastation Derek had wrought on a child, and the betrayal of a mother who had fought every single day to protect her. The prosecution laid out every detail, the subtle manipulations, the refusals of treatment, the family dynamics that allowed Derek's influence to go unchecked. I sat quietly, letting the recordings and the documentation speak for themselves. I didn't need to argue or plead. The truth was undeniable. When the judge finally addressed the court, her voice quivered, filled with sorrow and anger. This is unconscionable. A child manipulated at her most vulnerable moment. A mother grieving in silence while those around her failed to see the truth. He is a monster. For the first time in months, I felt a small release from the unbearable tension that had gripped me. Derek's cruelty had been exposed, his charm stripped away in the harsh light of justice. I still felt the weight of Lila's absence, the raw pain that would never fully disappear, but I knew that her story, her voice, would no longer be silenced. Leaving the courtroom that day, I held the rabbit tighter, imagining Lila's tiny hands wrapped around it. I whispered to her, "You were so brave, baby. I'm going to carry you with me always, and I'll make sure the world knows what they did to you." The fight wasn't over. The grief would last a lifetime, but justice had finally been served. That day, I learned something fundamental. Even in the darkest, most isolating moments, truth and courage can break through manipulation and lies. Derek could not erase the love I had for Lila, nor could he erase the bond we shared. The courtroom had witnessed what I already knew in my heart. Lila's life, though tragically short, had been full of love, resilience, and the unwavering courage of a mother determined to protect her. The climax of this battle wasn't just a legal victory. It was the vindication of a mother's intuition, the acknowledgement of a child's innocence stolen, and the shattering of a family member's carefully concealed cruelty. And in that moment, as the judge's words hung heavy in the air, I felt the first flicker of something I thought I'd never feel again, a measure of peace. Leaving the courtroom that day felt surreal, like stepping out of a storm into a world I hadn't recognized in months. The air outside was crisp, sunlight filtering through the courthouse windows, but it couldn't touch the heaviness inside me. Lila wasn't there to run into my arms, to laugh, or to ask her endless questions about the universe. She was gone, and no amount of justice could bring her back. Yet even in that grief, there was a strange, fragile relief. Derek's manipulation had been exposed for the world to see, and I finally had proof that I hadn't failed my daughter, not in the way everyone else had claimed. For months, Margaret, my mother, had whispered behind my back, blaming me for Lila's decline, insisting that I hadn't been strong enough or aware enough. Tom, too, had struggled with guilt, his well-meaning words often landing like criticism. The courtroom vindication didn't erase their judgment entirely, but it shifted the weight, redirecting blame where it belonged. In the weeks following the trial, family dynamics shifted in ways I hadn't anticipated. Margaret was quieter, more introspective, though I could see the shame behind her eyes. John, my father, finally admitted that he had known Derek's behavior was manipulative, but had convinced himself it wasn't serious. And even Tom started to truly listen, recognizing the depth of my struggle and the isolation I had endured while protecting Lila. The journey of exposing Derek had forced everyone to confront uncomfortable truths, but it also revealed who truly valued honesty, justice, and compassion. For me, the aftermath was both a physical and emotional reckoning. I had spent months living in fear, carefully recording conversations, gathering evidence, and navigating a family torn by denial, manipulation, and grief. Now, I had to confront the most difficult challenge of all, living in a world without my daughter. I found myself returning to the small rituals we had shared, sitting with her stuffed rabbit, flipping through her drawings, whispering stories as if she could still hear me. Each act of remembrance was a lifeline, a way to keep her spirit alive in a world that had tried to erase it. I also began to write, pouring memories, lessons, and conversations into journals I had kept hidden. I wrote about her bravery, her small but persistent courage in the face of pain, and the moments that defined her essence. The way she smiled when a bird landed on our windowsill, the way she hummed while painting rainbows in her coloring books. Writing became a way to process grief and honor the truth, ensuring that Lila's life was remembered for more than the tragedy of her death. The most important lesson I carried forward was about vigilance. I learned, painfully, that even those who seem closest to us can be sources of harm if unchecked. Derek's ability to manipulate Lila came not just from his cunning, but from my family's inattention, their biases, and their misplaced judgments. Protecting the vulnerable sometimes requires extraordinary measures, even against those we are supposed to trust. I understood now that being a parent is not just about love. It's about courage, intuition, and the relentless defense of a child's well-being, even when it means standing alone. Grief remained a constant companion, but it became layered with resilience. I could feel Lila's presence in small ways, in the quiet moments, in the laughter of children around me, in the bravery I discovered within myself. Her absence left an emptiness, yes, but it also left a fire. A determination to advocate for other children, to educate others about manipulation and coercion, and to speak openly about the complexities of family dynamics and loss. Lila's story became more than a personal tragedy. It became a beacon, a way to prevent the same darkness from touching another child. Even months later, I would sometimes pause, imagining what Lila would have said, what colors she would have chosen for her next drawing, what questions she might have asked about life or the stars. and I would whisper to her memory, promising that her courage would not be forgotten, that her life mattered, and that I would continue fighting for her and for every child who couldn't fight for themselves. In the end, the aftermath was not just about the courtroom victory or the exposure of Derek's cruelty. It was about reclaiming the truth, preserving a daughter's legacy, and finding the strength to live in a world forever changed by loss. The grief never fully disappeared, but it transformed into something enduring, a deeper understanding of love, courage, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her child. And through it all, Lila's spirit remained my guide, my anchor, and the reason I could face each day, carrying both her memory and the lessons of her life forward with unwavering resolve. Thank you for watching and listening to my story. Lila's life may have been short, but her courage and her spirit continue to teach me, and I hope they inspire you too. If this story moved you, if it made you reflect on the importance of protecting the ones you love, I encourage you to share it with someone who might need to hear it. Please take a moment to like this video if it touched your heart, leave a comment below sharing your thoughts or experiences, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future stories that matter. Your support helps bring real stories like Lila's to life and keeps the conversation going about love, family, and resilience in the face of unimaginable challenges. Remember, even in the darkest moments, love and courage can shine through. Thank you for being here and for honoring Lila's memory with me.